It's a rainy old day, but I looked at the weather report and it looks like we're not going to get any real sun for quite a while yet. I couldn't wait anymore to get started on this. So here's why I'm so excited about kickstarting this book club series today. Look, sometimes I read a book that leaves me thinking for years afterwards, oh my God, this is revolutionary. The information in this book is going to lead to huge changes. Political changes, changes to everything, the way we grow our food, the way we make things, the way that we do leadership, education, health, how we raise and educate our children, how we run an economy, how we relate to the natural world. And in one way or another, this book is going to be a big game changer. So you see, that's what I'm always asking silently when I'm reading a non-fiction book. How does the stuff in this book potentially change our world? And that's my bias when I am book shopping. I like a world changer. For me, the greatest page turners are always non-fiction. It's like it's a wild story, but it's happening in the real world. And so that's what this book club series is going to be about. A chance to share my favorite books with you. For the Paradigm Shifters Book Club, I'm going to be focusing on non-fiction. I just love it when I find an author that can take an academic subject that profoundly affects everyone and all of our lives and writes about it in a way that makes it accessible to anyone. That's how it should be. Science and the humanities should be made available to all of us. What sort of topics can you expect? Well, the books I find most juicy are about personal psychology, neuropsychology, relationships, society and civilization, history, economics even, anthropology, and really how all of those fields link up together as one. So basically everything to do with how we can get along better with each other and with the ecologies that we depend on. Really, my book club shares the same purpose as my Substack, which is how can we make this world a better place for ourselves, for each other, in fact for all living creatures. Okay, so you might want to know what's different about my book club. Well, I'm not going to be just telling you what's in the book. I'll be giving special attention to the implications, the ramifications of the book. In other words, if the stuff in this book is true, what does it mean in a real sense for you and me, for our families, for our communities, and for the world at large? In a concrete way, what can we do with the information in this book? How will it change our lives? How do I think this book is a paradigm shifter? If the book blows my mind with new revolutionary discoveries that can potentially affect all of our lives, I will want to share it with you. If the book gets a big emotional reaction from me, if it fills me with a sense of hope about our future, then it's a good candidate. If the book knocks my socks off, if it changes the way that I see the world, the way that I see humanity, the interrelationship of all things, in it goes. After all is said and done, if the book turns you on, you might go ahead and read it yourself and, of course, make up your own mind about it. You might see something in the book quite different than what I saw. Or maybe, who knows, you might get all you need from my review. Now, if you find yourself moved to comment on my book club videos, I would love to hear from you. I'm interested in your comments about the books that I'm going to share with you as I go. Also, if there's a book that you think is a real paradigm shifting blockbuster and you think it fits my criteria, then please let me know about it. Although, of course, I can't guarantee that I will read it right away, because you should see the tower of books I've already got lined up, ready to include in this series. but I do appreciate a great recommendation, and yours might well end up in my book club series. So, here we go. I want to launch this book club with a book that has been almost a Bible for me recently. I find myself going back to it a lot, talking to my friends about it, and even to my clients. It has so altered my perspective on so many things in so many ways. So, drum roll, the first book in my book club is... So the title of the book is Inflamed. Subtitle, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. Authors are Rupa, Marya and Patel. The publisher is Alan Lane, and the book came out in 2021. Now, a little about the authors. Rupa Marya is a professor of medicine at the University of California, and Raj Patel is a research professor at the University of Texas. Okay, so why is this book so important? At least why do I think this book is so important? Well, for starters, the authors are heralding a paradigm shift from the old and familiar germ model of medicine to a new model that's principally based on the understanding of systemic inflammation. In other words, the inflammation model of medicine. They're not saying that this new model thinks that germs aren't important. However, the new model arose out of the discovery that the body's inflammatory response to a pathogen or a toxin or a psychological stressor is what makes the critical difference between a good and a bad outcome. Now, the authors say that this shift is already well and truly here academically, although the changes that this new model call for have not fully filtered through to general practice, even less to public health policy. But we'll be having to come to terms with the inflammation model and everything that it implies, since academically this is it right now. Now, one of the chief reasons why this is so crucial is that there's a growing recognition that diseases that are based on chronic inflammation are our biggest killer. Bigger than infectious diseases by far, even bigger than wars. In fact, the World Health Organization rates chronic inflammatory disease as the biggest threat to human health. So that's things like cancers, diabetes, stroke, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, a lot of inflammatory gut diseases, autoimmune diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, even depression, believe it or not. All of those can be based on chronic, out-of-control inflammation in the body. How bad is it? Well, together, that category of disease causes over half of the world's early deaths. Something like over 9 million people die from cancer each year, over 6 million die from diabetes, 18 million die of cardiovascular disease, 8 million die from diseases caused by air pollution. Now that's a monstrous death toll. And the shocking thing is that a ton of this is preventable. People don't need to get sick that way in the first place. There is good reason to look at chronic inflammatory diseases as one group because the environment plays such a key role in causing it. Genes do play a role in terms of deciding which organ system is most vulnerable for everyone. But the pivotal realization here is that we can and should be stopping most of these potentially lethal diseases before they even start. Now, as a psychologist, this new way of understanding illness in terms of inflammation, it really gets my attention for two big reasons. First, Based on a large emerging body of evidence about the vital links between the gut and the brain, the inflammation model of medicine very clearly acknowledges that psychological trauma is a major cause of inflammation-based diseases such as cancers, cardiovascular, autoimmune, metabolic, etc. As a psychologist, I celebrate that. And now that finally mainstream medicine sees the direct link between psychological trauma, emotional stress, and disease, there are obvious implications for how we should be supporting parents better, protecting children's emotional health. All we need to do is divert resources to where this new evidence is so clearly pointing. The second reason I'm so excited about this book is that it gives us the most abundant, clear, and compelling evidence that the very same policies that would dramatically improve human health, save millions and millions of lives, quite literally, are the very same policies that would repair our devastated soils and ecologies and address key issues of social justice, inequality, and climate at the same time. In other words, social justice, environment, and medicine are three faces of the one thing. This lens of inflammation is a really interesting way to understand how everything in our lives connects together, how all of life's systems interconnect, making the difference between vitality and disease, regeneration and degeneration, societal well-being or division, from inflamed guts to inflamed bodies, to inflamed minds, to inflamed societies. So it actually thrills me to learn from Rupa, Marya and Raj Patel that this new inflammation model is such a unifying thought system that offers answers simultaneously for so many of the most pressing issues of today. Sometimes there is one type of solution that can address a whole series of problems, even though we had previously thought that these problems were separate and unrelated. And the scope of the changes that this book points to, with rock-solid science, are nothing short of a civilizational quantum leap forward, a transformation at the paradigm-shifting level. Now, one of the most eye-popping implications of this updated inflammation model of medicine relates to the last pandemic, the COVID times, pointing straight to some vital public health measures that should have been put in place but weren't. Our outcomes would have been vastly different if authorities had understood and acted upon the role of systemic inflammation. The public health measures that the inflammation model inescapably points to might surprise you, but I'll be discussing those measures in parts 2 and 3 of this presentation. Now, in terms of future pandemics, there are very clear and urgent implications about how we can prepare well ahead of time before the next pandemic strikes that would dramatically change our body's response to infection. When you appreciate the role of systemic inflammation in the quality of our immune response, it starts to dawn on you that waiting until after a pandemic strikes and then hitting people post hoc with emergency responses, well, that's just folly, and it runs counter to conventional science. But I'll say more about that later. First, let's understand more about what Rupa and Raj are telling us about what inflammation means for all of us. By the way, so here's the book. As you can see, I've worked it pretty hard, okay? I sort of eat my books. It's very dog-eared, a little bit worse for weather. There's my etchings all through it, but I just wanted to show you what the book looks like. It's a hefty book, and check out this bibliography. I mean, it's pretty substantial. The authors don't make a single claim without some solid backing. Now, There are plenty of authors writing about this new inflammation model of medicine. It's something you're going to hear about more and more because there seems to be a growing emphasis on inflammatory processes in the body being a key driver of disease as well as treatment outcomes. In other words, how well or how badly our body copes with illness. As I said earlier, chronic inflammation-based diseases, in their totality, are our #1 killer worldwide. Bigger than infectious disease, bigger even than war. But are you seeing a globally coordinated response to prevent this most preventable category of disease, even at a fraction of the scale of the COVID response? If not, why not? What's getting in the way? That's a most interesting discussion that Rupa, Marya and Patel are provoking. Now, I think among all the books that talk about inflammation, this one is fundamentally different, and I'll tell you why. If you listen to the title, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, you get the idea that this book won't let you think about medicine as something that only treats the individual separately from their environment. This book argues, and I think really powerfully, that disease incidence and outcomes as well are so profoundly dependent on a person's circumstances, and that medicine only makes sense if it treats the context, not just the person. I think the authors put forward an unimpeachable argument that to be truly effective, medicine must be preventive, not just based on drugs and surgery after an illness has already taken hold. Now you're probably thinking, what's new? I've already heard all of that, and I'm sure you're right. But here's the problem. Although the prevention is better than cure adage is as old as the hills, today it's often associated with a wellness movement that a lot of people tend to dismiss, and they think it's kind of dodgy. And even to the extent that the inflammation model of medicine might be gaining acceptance and becoming part of the dialogue around health, do you see any social policy reflecting it? I'm not seeing it, are you? As in anti-inflammatory social policy, I'll explain what I mean later. And most of the preventable and avoidable causes of inflammatory disease are still in place, barely challenged by any regulation, and in many cases only getting worse. I'll be talking about the policy initiatives that would dramatically reduce inflammatory disease and death, not completely, but a dramatic reduction in their incidence in parts 2 and 3. You'll see that for now, though, policy is phenomenally out of touch with established science, decades behind. In other words, what we know is not what we do. In terms of health policy or social policy, we certainly don't operate as if systemic inflammation, that gigantic driver of disease and early death, matters one jot. It's as if an entire academic consensus, backed by rivers of evidence, doesn't even exist. And that should make us all really nervous. The authors are outraged about this inaction, and I have to agree with them. I think it's pretty suspect. But at the same time, there are good news here, and that is that we don't have to accept anywhere near the current levels of our biggest killer, inflammation-based disease. So much of the suffering, the tragedy, the loss, and the gigantic budgetary burden can be prevented before it even begins. As I mentioned earlier, one of the standout differences about Inflamed is the way that the authors explain how our psychological environment, just as much as our air, food and water, can produce inflammation-based disease in our bodies. And now, I remember it was only recently that anyone who suggested that unhealed emotional trauma can cause physiological disorders like some cancers, stroke, heart disease, etc. Well, those people were poo-pooed and dismissed as New Age quacks. And this book says, wait a minute, the link between emotions and the body is real, and inflammation can be part of that mechanism. The gut-brain connection has been quite clearly mapped now, and step by step these authors explain the biochemical pathways through which emotional trauma or chronic stress can lead to a range of inflammatory diseases, including some deadly cancers and heart disease. So that's not controversial anymore. We are losing so many people to psychological injuries and environmental poisons that are entirely preventable. And virtually none of the obvious things that we should be doing show up in health policy or in family policy, such as, for example, paid parental leave, provisions for good enough support for parents, for natural birth, for healthy attachment, or education and provisions for healthy infant and child nutrition. Also, a ban on corporal punishment of children, and more. So I think that means the lowest hanging fruit that could slash our national health budgets are just being left hanging on the tree. Now, this bit is not actually in the book, it's my own thinking, but I reckon that we're probably living in an in-between time, a time when the newly established medical science, in other words, the inflammation model, is yet to be reflected in a necessary retooling of medicine, at least for much of the world. And the revolution in health policy that the now well understood inflammation model demands just hasn't quite started yet. There's bound to be a time lag between a new body of knowledge and a revision of culture and practice. Admittedly, it would be a big deal, a major redo of university curricula and approaches to general practice, not to mention a fairly extensive overhaul of a business model for one of the biggest industry sectors in the world. But for me, that's the exciting part. The implications of the new inflammation model of medicine are clear. We have to reinvest dramatically in prevention over cure. And we can. Drugs and surgery target diseases that are far more preventable than was once acknowledged. With some exceptions, drugs and surgery are usually brought to bear by the time that a disease has already taken hold and already done some of the damage. I get the impression that in medicine as we know it, the idea of prevention usually tends to mean something like early diagnosis. Now that's great. Treatment is easier and more successful if we catch the symptoms early in the game. But what about preventing key diseases? On a community level, from even arising in the first place. In the case of many of our worst killers, of course, genes and pathogens are important, but they're definitely not the whole story. Our societies are decades behind what is now academically understood. Millions of lives could be saved and billions of lives could be vastly improved if we enact what this book and other similar books so capably and scientifically imply. And hard science is now saying it. We can reduce the bulk of what is killing us and disabling us and spoiling our quality of life. But it would require a very challenging reordering of social policy, new mandates, environmental policy, and medical practice. We need to redistribute public monies towards supporting parents better, protecting children better, and very importantly, regulating industries until we remove the industrial chemicals that are fouling our air, our soils, our food, and our water. Deep medicine, according to Rupa, Marya, and Patel, is unavoidably political. Now, since our environment is so crucial in our health story, it no longer makes sense to just treat the individual and be done with it. We need to treat the person's context, their material and their emotional environment. Relationships matter. Social justice matters. Food, air, and water matter. Climate matters. Why? Well, this really makes sense. The authors make the case that how inflammatory our environment is, both chemically and psychologically, has one hell of a lot to do with life circumstances that can sometimes be way beyond an individual's control. For instance, we don't get a choice about whether we'll be born into a struggling, conflicted family, or we don't get a choice whether we're born into a disadvantaged, downtrodden or colonized group. We may not get a choice on whether we live in a polluted, toxic neighborhood. And unless we're wealthy enough, we may not get a choice about our air and water quality, what gets put into our soil, and what gets sprayed onto our food. Many of us cannot hope to have the wealth and the time to pursue clean diets and mindfulness retreats. It usually takes a certain level of societal privilege to avoid the sugar, the refined carbohydrates, and the inflammatory junk that defines the diets of entire demographics. The modern world has decimated our gut bacteria, inflamed our bodies, and a privileged few might be able to escape the worst of this disaster. In other words, social and economic status and social injustice can make or break our health. And if you're able to take personal responsibility for a preventive approach to health, the authors argue that you are already quite lucky. What we do have a choice about is how we use our voice, our actions, how we collaborate to effect change on the conditions that are inflaming our bodies en masse. And that's why Rupa, Marya, and Patel introduced the concept of deep medicine. That's a provocative term that these authors have coined. They're saying that medicine can't be effective unless it tackles systemic injustice. They're saying that medicine ain't medicine unless it's environmental. Now, this book has left me with a clear sense that to be truly medical, you have to be political. And that's what the authors mean when they coin the term deep medicine. Now, I like the way that they frame health in terms of social health and in terms of justice. Medicine has to be environmental, but this has to go way beyond the personal lifestyle medicine. Ultimately, the responsibility for human health is collective. There's a critical role for strong government regulation, strong government mandates on industry to get the things that inflame our bodies out of our lives. I love how this book empowers us to make personal changes that can transform our family's health while at the same time liberating the individual from blame. Now that is a brilliant balancing act. My reaction to the book, I think this book is going to spin your head around. I believe it will make you see a lot of things very differently. It certainly did that for me. It was one hell of an eye-opener. This book is likely to make you reappraise almost everything that you thought you knew about health, even more so about the idea of personal responsibility. Where does that fit? When is it societal responsibility? So, for me, Inflamed Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa, Marya and Patel is one of the most eye-opening books that I have read. It's massively well researched, solid, authoritative. I really appreciated the things that this book forced me to think about, namely, that the way that we structure our society makes the difference between health and disease. I found myself getting angry sometimes as I read Inflamed, the more that I discovered how avoidable so much of our disease is, and how much of it is industrially produced, and how much of what is killing us relates directly to abusive and undemocratic power structures in business and politics. Medicine is justice, justice is medicine. After reading Rupa Marya's and Raj Patel's book, I'm left feeling that the possibilities for our future are absolutely thrilling, if only we make policies that follow the changes in scientific understanding. Now, I want to delve a bit deeper into Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice to get into some of the more directly helpful detail. This is a big book. I had a big reaction to it. So, I've made a part 2 and a part 3 for Inflamed. Parts 2 and 3 will include a more detailed look at the biggest causes of chronic inflammation in our bodies and what we can do about that, both as social change activists and in our personal lives. I'll also talk about the critical implications of this book for how we should address the next pandemic quite differently and well before it strikes. To find that, please go to my Substack, and of course, if you would like to support my work, you know the drill, please hit the like button and the subscribe button. My YouTubes, by the way, are free. So, I hope to see you at parts 2 and 3 of Inflamed, as well as all the other paradigm shifting books that I'll be sharing with you in this series, the Paradigm Shifters Book Club. Do check out my Substack. It's called Psychology for Paradigm Shift. It has loads of other good stuff in it, and hopefully I might hear from you there. Adios.